Greetings and welcome to another episode of Businesstalk podcast. I am your host Deepak. Let's start it. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Nicholas Wright, MRCP, PhD, a neuroscientist whose research focuses on the brain, technology, and security. He is an affiliated scholar at Georgetown University, honorary research senior research fellow at University College London, consultant at Intelligent Biology, and a non-resident adjunct fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Dr. Nicholas explores the intersection of neuroscience, human behavior, and technology to understand the dynamics of competition and conflict. Over the past decade, Dr. Nicholas has advised Pentagon's Joint Staff and he provides strategic guidance on artificial intelligence to shape Europe's largest technology company. DRPA adopted his definition of gray zone conflict for its recent AI initiative, and his article on AI was selected by Foreign Affairs as one of its top 10 online reads of 2028. He edited Artificial Intelligence, China, Russia, and Global Order and co-edited Human Machine War, How the Mind-Tech Nexus Will Win Future Wars. His collaborative efforts include work with Peking University and track 1.5 dialogues with institutions such as White House, the UK Cabinet Office, and the Australian Prime Minister's Office. Dr. Nicholas' earlier career includes research in nuclear policy at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C., and clinical practice as a neurologist in Oxford and London. He has conducted functional brain imaging studies at UCL and the London School of Economics. His work has been featured by The Economist and the New York Times, and he has published outlets such as Foreign Affairs. The Atlantic appeared on the BBC and CNN. He holds medical degree from UCL, a BSc in Health Policy from Imperial College London, membership of the Royal College of Physicians UK, and both an MSc and PhD in Neuroscience from UCL. In this episode, Dr. Nicholas Wright offers thought-provoking insights from his forthcoming book, Warhead, How the Brain Shapes War and War Shapes the Brain. So without further delay, let's welcome Dr. Nicholas Wright to the podcast. Dr. Nicholas, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Hi, Deepak. It's great to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Dr. Wright, you begin Warhead by exploring how the human brain is wired for conflict. Could you walk us through the core science behind this idea and what does it mean to say our brains are built for war?
Thank you, Deepak. That's a great question. So throughout history and prehistory, many humans have faced violence, starvation, and other life and death emergencies. And to navigate such life-threatening emergencies, every brain is built to win, or at least survive, conflict. Human against nature and human against human. And as we journey through the brain, we see every part is made of survival-grade neural machinery. From the brainstem down at the very base of the brain, all the way to the other end, to the frontal pole that does a lot of our most sophisticated thinking. So starting at the brainstem, for example, are regions that are crucial for pain. Pain is enormously powerful, and pain is enormously useful as the alert system telling us if there is tissue damage. Moving up a bit are regions crucial for fear. Fear is useful to help us survive threats in dangerous, fast-moving and uncertain environments. A little bit further up, we have maps. And these maps are not a metaphor. These are maps that are literally in there, in our brains. And we can explore these maps to simulate different ways to navigate situations that would be too dangerous to try out in the real world. Moving up further, we have larger areas that do many different aspects of thinking, such as to grasp others' intentions. And those intentions, what do they intend? That's important so we can collaborate and cooperate, and also compete with others who might try to deceive us or outwit us. And of course, all this survival-grade machinery is the same machinery with which we live our everyday lives, operate at work and everywhere else. And so we can learn a lot about ourselves to help us in our everyday lives by looking from the perspective of war, because those are the conditions in which a lot of this machinery was built to help us survive. So there are many more brain areas that, before we reach the end of our journey, and I hope we'll have time to go through them. But at the very other end of our brain, so we started the brainstem, at the very other end of our brain, at the frontal pole, this bit at the frontal pole, that helps us do thinking about thinking. Right? This is a very important part of the brain, and it helps us self-reflect, to introspect, to gain knowledge about ourselves. And that self-knowledge of ourselves as individuals, plus the self-knowledge of ourselves as humans that we gain from our journey through the brain, this self-knowledge can help us see enough of the bigger picture of ourselves in the world so that we can make wiser choices that help us live better.
You draw on battle stories from American and Chinese soldiers in World War II to modern day conflict zones. How did you choose these historical examples, and what do they reveal about universal patterns in brain and behavior under pressure?
Thanks, Deepak. Again, a great question. So what I wanted to understand was I wanted to apply neuroscience to understand, to give us better self-knowledge of why we humans fight, lose, and win wars. And so the examples I use in the book are historical cases that involve why we went to war and also why countries lost war and won wars. Because it's very important to remember that, if we don't want a war to start, but if a war starts, we want to try and win that war. So I used a variety of different historical cases, and I focus mostly on a story, because human brains like stories, a story that takes us from just before World War II through the at least 2,174 days of World War II, through the Cold War that followed it, through the unipolar US moment, where the US was overwhelmingly powerful in the world, militarily certainly, and on to our current era. Luckily, I've had historians. I've had wonderful military historians who have looked at my examples and have said very kind things, like Sir Lawrence Freedman and Beatrice Heuser, who are some eminent military historians. And I'll just give you some examples. And these are also examples that I think illustrate, as you say, the universal features that matter between wars between humans everywhere and at all times, and that show us the importance of the brain and of some aspects of the world right now. So one of the key examples that I open the book with is the Battle of France in 1940. Now, we often misremember this, right? We think, oh, the Germans had better machines. The Germans had more machines. The Germans were bound to win. France was bound to lose. That is not true, right? On May the 9th, 1940, the day before the German offensive began, right, France was considered to have the strongest army in the world. All right. France's defenders, the British and the French, had more troops, more tanks, more planes, right, more artillery. But the Germans cut through us like a knife through butter, to use a terrible cliche. And the reason is that they better harnessed will, skill, daring, surprise, in particular surprise, and they outwitted us. And then in addition to that, the reason why Hitler's horses, cavalry, were clanking up the Champs-Élysées in Paris less than 7 weeks later is also because French will to fight, their will to carry on fighting, collapsed. And so that's another really vital aspect of war, the will to fight. And so just to say one other aspect of World War II that I deal with in a quite extensive way in the book is China's World War II, which is a story that we rarely tell, but that actually is very important for understanding our modern world, and in which many hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops fought hard and diligently and bravely and courageously to fight against the Japanese.
Very insightful. Dr. Nicholas, one of the striking themes in your book is the neural basis of courage and fear. How does the brain process life-threatening situations in battle? And how can this knowledge reshape how we train, and support soldiers today?
Yeah, I mean, that's again a great question. So the first thing to say is that this is something that most people don't may not think about that much, but fear is useful. Okay, we need fear. Without fear, we get into lots of problems. I'll give you a practical example. At my laboratory in London, I spent a few days with two German ladies, two twins, and they had normal psychological testing on almost everything, but they could not feel fear. Okay, they had lost a particular part of the brain called the amygdala, which is a bit up from the brainstem, and they could not feel fear. And their families told us this got them into a variety of problems. Okay, but they didn't necessarily have, but they lived in rural Germany, which is quite a pleasant place now. There was another lady who a colleague of mine tested. She also lacked her amygdala, and she again didn't feel fear. Now, you might think that lacking fear means that you will become a criminal, perhaps, or you will be enormously successful, right? Because you would take other things and you wouldn't feel afraid of things. And that's not what happened to this lady. She grew up and lived in a dangerous part of California, and in a disadvantaged part of California. And she was actually not a criminal. She was often the victim of crime. So we need fear in order to operate. And we need that because fear is useful to help us work in dynamic, uncertain, fast moving situations, right? We combine fear with, and fear is a response to threat that operates on many different timescales. And we combine fear with a very quick, rapid appraisal of risks. So a number of your listeners probably work in economics. And actually, I did a lot of work on how people look at economic risks in the brain. And the human brain is beautifully estimates and very rapidly estimates risks in the environments. And then also other really visceral feelings. These are all fear, other emotions like anger and so on. These are all visceral emotions. They well up inside us. And another set is the social motivations, like rejecting unfairness, for example. Now, all of these play a role in our will to fight. Now, in addition to that, you have other things like ideology and so on, but they only build on this basic set of visceral emotions, these visceral instincts that make us stand and fight. Now, obviously, that can go wrong. And so we can have problems like PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, which is essentially fear run amok. It is an anxiety disorder. But I'll just end this by saying actually something that's quite positive and that goes against a lot of what a lot of people seem to think these days. On social media platforms, for example, like TikTok. And that is that actually we are very resilient. Humans are remarkably resilient creatures. Okay, I am hopefully a remarkably resilient creature. You are hopefully a remarkably resilient creature. And, and actually, service personnel don't really have higher rates, or they may have similar, only slightly higher rates of PTSD to matched populations who are civilians. Now, yes, that can increase under severe combat stresses, but actually, even then, the majority of soldiers do not have PTSD, and we are remarkably resilient humans. Clearly, we can use the neurobiology, work out the neuroscience to help us unlearn fears, to help us cope with PTSD. But I think, and I discussed that in the book, but I think a really important message here is how resilient we humans actually are.
Deception and cooperation are both central to warfare and everyday life. From a neuroscience perspective, how do this behavior coexist and what triggers the brain to choose one over the other?
That's a great question. So what we do is, so you're nodding, or scowling or laughing or whatever, or moving your camera. And I am building a model of you, right? In my mind, I'm building a model of you, and I'm trying to work out what you intend to do. What are your intentions? So, for example, imagine we were playing doubles tennis, right? We were playing tennis in the park, the local park, and you and I were on the same team. We were playing doubles, right? I'm trying to work out. So I'm trying to collaborate with you. So I try and I wonder where Deepak is going to serve this serve, right? So I can get into the best spot to return it. So we communicate. I have a model of you that tries to work out what you intend to do, and that helps us collaborate and cooperate. But equally, right, and I might get that from a smile that you give, or a little wink or a nod, or whatever. And the better I know you, the better I'll be able to work out your intentions, and the longer I've known you for. But also, we're trying to work out the intentions of the opposition, of the competitors on the other side of the tennis net. And there we want, and that helps us try and outwit them, to deceive them. Should we hit cross court or down the line? Right? And so we use the same neural machinery. We have wonderful neural machinery, brain machinery, for modeling. We create a model in our minds of the other's intentions, and we can use that to help us see when they're trying to deceive us, or for us to cooperate with them, how much we should trust them, for example. And I wouldn't say it's so much about simply whether we do one or the other. We use the same neural machinery, and these are really difficult challenges. Computers are not anywhere near as good as humans are at this yet, but these are really difficult challenges, and we use this machinery to help collaborate and cooperate with others.
Okay, Nicholas, what role does leadership play neurologically in high-stake environments like war? Are there specific traits or brain functions that make someone a better leader under stress?
That is a good question. This is a subject that has not been studied enough, I think, in the literature. But I would say there are some great studies. Now, you can almost always find a single neuroscience or psychology study, and it will tell you something, and it sounds great. But on the whole, we'd like to, and my book is based on whole bodies of work, so we can be really sure enough of the literature. But I think we are gaining a better understanding of how leadership works. So, and I think there are really three features. The first feature is, are you willing to take on responsibility for others? And actually, a lot of people are not willing to take on responsibility for others. They would rather hand that responsibility over to others. So, and we know that there have been some very nice brain imaging work showing this, and where this happens in the brain, and it involves areas, for example, including the temporal cortex, which is particularly important. So, I'd say that's one area. Do people have the willingness to shoulder responsibility, and the self-confidence to shoulder responsibility? The second thing, and just to say, we can also calibrate that. So we need to calibrate our confidence, and hopefully I'll have time to come back to that at the end, because that's really important. Calibrating our self-confidence is really important. A second thing is that we need a model of what we want those others to achieve, a plan. Right? Now, we are learning a huge amount about how humans plan. And so that's another thing. How do we create a model how does the leader create a model that they can impart to others to give them a purpose, to give them a plan? And then the third feature is the ability to communicate. So this is something where humans are amazing, right? We have unique communication abilities in the animal world. Yes, other animals have something approximating to language, orca whales, and so on. But our language capabilities are really, truly unique in the animal world. And so another vital feature is our ability to communicate. And that involves not only what you say, but how you say it. And obviously I explore some techniques to help better influence others in the book.
Fantastic. You have advised the Pentagon and work at the intersection of neuroscience and national security. Our military institutions integrating neuroscience into strategy, training, and policy making today?
The answer is yes, as one amongst, amongst a range of different really important inputs. So I'll give you 3 examples from my own personal work where I personally have been involved. So first of all is thinking about influencing others, what's called information operations. And I think it's really important to remember that countries such as Russia were conducting, extensive, large, well-funded, very aggressive disinformation and misinformation operations targeting people in a wide variety of different countries. And so one of the things to do is to work out what are the cognitive or the psychological vulnerabilities people have. How can we try and defend those? And how can we also try to influence others most effectively? And so in the book, I describe going to DARPA, which is they're the guys who invented the internet essentially, and a variety of other things. And one of the things that I talked about there was how can we think about countering these information operations? And so that involves, for example, harnessing surprise. So can we make our messages more novel and interesting and surprising? So that's information operations. A second area, and this relates directly to India, is nuclear weapons, right? So India and Pakistan very recently obviously had a non-trivial border clash. India and Pakistan are both nuclear armed states, right? China and India not long ago also had a border clash, and both China and India are nuclear armed states, right? There is nothing more important in the world today, climate change, anything else you want to talk about, nothing in the world is more important than nuclear weapons. The only thing that could kill every single person in India tomorrow morning is nuclear weapons, right? Nuclear weapons are enormously important. And the people who work on nuclear weapons I haven't ever worked with people in the Indian government on that, but in the American government and the British government, they're very thoughtful, serious people who really care deeply about what they're doing. They take it extremely seriously because it's an enormous responsibility. And the thing they're trying to do is to understand the centerpiece of what they're doing is to understand how key decision makers on the other side, Vladimir Putin, for example, how key decision makers on the other side are making their decisions. And so to that end, of course, they're fascinated and think it's important to have a realistic model of how the human brain works, how we respond to threats, punishments, when we might be cornered and escalate, and all the rest of it. And then a third area is human-machine teaming. So as you said, I've just had a different book out on human-machine teaming. And this is vital because and I think this is what will increasingly happen as we increasingly work with generative AI, with robots, with all sorts of different machines that are increasingly powerful and increasingly freely thinking in important ways. Getting the most out of those machines will involve getting the most out of the human-machine collaboration that we need with those machines. So a lot of the effectiveness of those new AI machines will be how well they interact with humans. To give you an example, when I was a junior doctor, when I was a young doctor, I had a phone that was it was a Microsoft phone, and it could email, it could look things up on the internet, and I used none of that. I didn't use any of it because the interface was rubbish. Instead, the iPhone came out, and it could do nothing more than basically than the Microsoft phones, but the interface was beautiful, and suddenly everybody was using it. And just to pique your readers' interest, there's also a new way of interfacing, not with a finger to poke a screen, but using the brain, direct brain-computer interfaces. And there are a couple of technical issues that need to be resolved there, but very soon I think we could be seeing huge advances in brain-computer interfaces too.
Dr. Wright, in the book, you also explore how understanding the brain can help us protect liberal democratic values. Can you expand on this connection between brain science and geopolitics?
Yes. So I think I won't go again over the example I gave on information operations, but I think that is part of it, right? How do we defend our democracy against disinformation from others? But actually, the most important threats very rarely come from outside with that type of thing. The most important threats often come from inside, from the decay of a society. And central to thinking about, and so we need to work hard on that, and there will be important debates in which good people can disagree on the best ways to keep our societies, our democracies healthy. But then in addition to that, we need to think that soldiers, the military, will always be central to the functioning, right? To if there is going to be a civil war, or if there is going to be a coup, or if there is going to be a regime change through a gradual shift in how the regime operates, right? From the days of the ancient Roman republics, which I know better than Indian history, so I apologize. I'm not going to try and make comments on Indian history because I don't know it as well as I know Roman history, for example. You see Julius Caesar and others, and the shift from a republic to a monarchy, essentially, or an imperial system. In all those cases, the military will be absolutely central. And to understand, now that will always be the case. That matters in China. Mao Zedong had the famous saying, something that power grows from the barrel of the gun. Lots of people know that part of the saying, but the rest of it was, and the party will always control the gun, right? So he was saying the civilians will have control over the military. I have spoken to a number of people in the Indian government. The whole idea here is in India, in particular, the civilians have control over the military, not the military over the civilians. This issue of military-civilian relations will always be central, and that is something that a lot of people have overlooked more recently because we've been living in a very, in many ways, very, tranquil part of history over the past, since the end of the Cold War. But now we're re-emerging into a more difficult time. I think we have to relearn some of these facts about where a lot of power lies in our democracies.
How do modern technologies like cyber warfare or AI interact with the evolutionary brain mechanism you described? Are we equipped neurologically to handle this newer, more abstract form of conflict?
Well, the simple answer is no. We're never, ever fully equipped to deal with a new tool. But the amazing thing is that we always, we are humans. We are tool makers, right? We have been using new tools for millions of years. And in fact, tools are so bound up in how we work, right, in how we operate, that the fact that we've used tools has changed the structure of our bodies. So regardless of what you think of my jawline, humans, compared to lots of other animals, have puny jaws, right? We are puny in terms of our body muscles, right? An adolescent chimpanzee can easily overpower a fully grown human or even multiple humans, right? Human males, right? We are quite puny. Our bowels are only 60% the length they should be. But what we do instead is we use tools. We developed spears. So we have arms that are good for throwing spears. We can fashion spears. We can fashion axes. We can cook things. We can grind things. So tools have changed. Tools have shaped our bodies and our brains. And we can even see that with experiments on monkeys, where we teach monkeys to use tools. And we can look at that in humans as well, where tool use actually changes our brains. So you can never separate us from tools. But clearly, these new tools we've developed, cyber and AI and so on, are really quite remarkable and new. But so in that sense, we're not ready for them, but we're kind of always ready for new tools. And the other thing I'd say that is remarkable is that in 2014, a chap called John O'Keefe won the Nobel Prize for looking at the hippocampal and entorhinal cortex, an area of brain that does navigation and maps. And so, for example, we can use these maps in our brains, which are literal maps. And just say John O'Keefe won his Nobel Prize at University College London. So that's partly why I said that as well. So that's my university in London. And we use these literal maps in our brains to navigate in the physical world. But we can also navigate, for example, in really abstract spaces. So in cyberspace, for example, I think just as we saw sailors who use incredible maps of the ocean currents, tides, winds, and so on, we will see the same thing with cyber warriors, and indeed space warriors in outer space, who will be using mental maps, mental geographies of these new terrains. They'll be adapting what we have to work in these new environments.
Dr. Nicholas, you write that the same brain can navigate battlefield, also governs conflict in offices and boardrooms. What practical lessons can civilian leaders or organizations take from Warhead to manage conflict more wisely?
Thank you. So obviously hopefully there are many lessons from the book for everyday life and for the workplace, because we use the same survival grade neural machinery that was developed for violent, combat and conflict. We use that same neural machinery in our everyday lives. And to give you two examples, so one of them is about visceral feelings of unfairness, right? Or visceral feelings of fear or anger, right? What we often do as humans is we feel these visceral instincts, these visceral emotions or responses or motivations well up inside us, and they influence the decisions we make. For example, moral decisions. What ought we to do? How have I been treated? How should I respond in this situation? And what we know is that when humans make moral decisions, there isn't a special moral decision-making bit of the brain. We use the same decision networks that we use for the rest of our decisions. And when people make these moral decisions and they feel very upset, we often think, oh, well, maybe they'll just get over it, or maybe they don't really think this, or maybe this is something that isn't true. But actually, humans have a wide variety of different preferences. We know this from lots of experiments done in lots of different countries. Humans often feel very differently about different things. Things like how much they care about unfairness, how much they care about risks, for example. And other people may just, other people may not be being untruthful. They may really just feel fundamentally different to the way we feel about something, and it feels really right to them. And I think it's important to reflect on that. And the word reflection is also important. So there was a very nice Harvard Business School study in which a key part was conducted in India, which looked at reflection. And a really important thing that we can do is often stop and reflect. And so, in fact, when we talk about all the way through the brain and we get to the frontal pole, this bit right at the other end of the journey through our brain, which is our most sophisticated part of the brain that helps us see the bigger picture of ourselves in the world so we can make wiser choices. And I really like the fact you said more wisely, because wisdom is very important. That reflection is really crucial for wiser decisions. And in the book, I give some descriptions of specific ways that people can do that.
Okay, Nicholas, my last question. Finally, as we face an increasingly dangerous world, what gives you hope? How can understanding the brain help us not just survive conflict, but shape a more stable and secure future?
So I am optimistic. I think that we have an enormous power as humans, for self-knowledge, right? Lots of other animals have really sophisticated models of the world. Even there is a small bird in my garden called a robin. A robin, it has a little red breast. It's often on Christmas cards in Britain. Robins have very sophisticated capabilities for perceiving the world, for acting in the world, because they need to often eat up to a quarter of their body weight every day to survive over winter. Another thing they might need to do is understand territories, because in some populations of robins, these little birds, about 10% of them die over winter over fights about territory, right? So robins have very sophisticated models of the world, but what they don't have, but we do have, and that no other animal has in anything like the same capacity as us, is our abilities for self-knowledge. And that self-knowledge is power, right? Because the human brain has always been the central weapon of war and also the central weapon, central instrument of peace. And that matters now because so many people are asking why are so many wars happening and brewing, and what can we do about it? And what we can do is we can use self-knowledge. We can introspect. You, Deepak, me, Nick, we can introspect ourselves, and we can also use the self-knowledge we gain from our journey, our understanding of the brain, all the way from the brainstem, all the way through to how we think about ourselves. We can use the power of that self-knowledge to better understand why humans fight, lose, and win wars, right? Yes, that can be used for bad ends. Of course it can, right? We mustn't forget that competitors, horrendous authoritarian states, have in the past been more successful than the democracies at harnessing the brain's capacities for fighting wars. But we have also been very good at that in the democracies. We have used our brain's capacities for good in the past. We have harnessed them well enough to win. We've done that in the past, and I strongly believe we can again, and that makes me optimistic for the future.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholas Wright, for joining us today and offering such a compelling window in the neuroscience of conflict. Warhead is a timely and thought-provoking exploration of how our brains shape and are shaped by war, leadership, and the choices we make under pressure. Your insights not only deepen our understanding of the human mind, but also challenge us to think critically about how we respond to increasingly complex world. We look forward to following your continued work at the intersection of science, strategy, and security. Thank you once again for joining us and sharing your invaluable insights today.
Thank you so much, Deepak. It was a pleasure.